20 black actors that vanished and were never seen again. Imagine being the most famous person in the room, and the next day, you're just a ghost. What if I told you that some of the legends you grew up watching didn't just retire, they vanished into thin air? From Hollywood kings to iconic child stars, they left their fame, their fortunes, and their identities behind. Was it a choice, or were they pushed into the shadows? Today, we are peeling back the curtain on the most mysterious disappearances in entertainment history. You won't believe where some of them ended up. Before we dive into these haunting stories, make sure to subscribe to Remembered Lives channel and hit that notification bell. Join our community as we honor the legacies that time tried to erase. Jaye Davidson. In the glittering history of Hollywood, few stories are as baffling as that of Jaye Davidson. In 1992, this British-American stylist was discovered in a bar, leading to one of the most enigmatic debuts in cinema history as Dill in The Crying Game. The performance was so profound, so ethereal, that it earned him an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actor. For most, this would be the start of a lifelong pursuit of fame, but for Jaye, the spotlight felt like a cage. He famously attempted to sabotage his next big role in the 1994 blockbuster Stargate by demanding an astronomical salary of $1 million, hoping the producers would walk away. To his surprise, they agreed. Jaye delivered an iconic, chilling performance as the sun god Ra, and then, at the absolute peak of his commercial and critical power, he did the unthinkable. He vanished. There were no scandals, no public meltdowns, just a quiet, deliberate exit. Now 57, Jaye Davidson remains the ultimate ghost of Hollywood. He didn't lose his way, he found a different one. He returned to his roots in the fashion industry, working as a stylist and occasionally modeling, far from the prying eyes of the paparazzi. For our older viewers who remember the shock of seeing him for the first time on screen, his disappearance is a powerful reminder that success isn't always measured by fame. Jaye chose privacy over prestige, proving that sometimes the most courageous act an artist can perform is to walk away when the world is screaming for more. He remains a legend not for what he did after his fame, but for the dignified silence he has maintained for over 3 decades. Misty Upham. The story of Misty Upham is not just a disappearance. It is a tragedy that echoes through the misty forests of the Pacific Northwest. Known for her powerhouse performances in August Osage County and Frozen River, Misty was a fierce advocate for Native American representation. She stood toe-to-toe with legends like Meryl Streep, bringing a raw, haunting authenticity to every frame. But behind that formidable talent was a soul struggling with deep-seated pain and medical challenges. In October 2014, the industry was shaken when news broke that Misty had gone missing from her family's home in Auburn, Washington. For 11 agonizing days, her family searched, pleaded, and criticized the lack of immediate police urgency, a struggle many Indigenous families know all too well. On October 16th, a search party organized by her own family and friends found her body at the bottom of a 150-foot ravine near the White River. She was only 32 years old. The official ruling was blunt force trauma from an accidental fall, but the shadows surrounding her final days never truly lifted. Her family firmly believed there was foul play, citing her fear of local authorities and her vulnerable state. Her passing left a void in cinema that has never been filled. Misty didn't just vanish from our screens, she was taken from a world that had only begun to appreciate her brilliance. For those of us who watched her craft, her absence is a heavy silence, a reminder of the fragile line between the brilliance of art and the harsh realities of a life cut short in the dark. She remains a symbol of both the immense talent and the systemic neglect that often haunts the most marginalized voices in our society. Shawn Nelson. In 1994, a young boy named Shawn Nelson delivered a performance in the film Fresh that many critics still consider the greatest child acting turn in history. Playing a 12-year-old chess prodigy navigating the dangerous drug war of Brooklyn, Shawn displayed a stoicism and emotional depth that outshined veteran co-stars like Samuel L. Jackson. Insiders whispered that they were looking at the next Denzel Washington. He had the world at his feet, yet as he grew older, the path to superstitial stardom seemed to lead toward a destination he didn't desire. Unlike the tragic tales of child stars lost to addiction, Shawn's disappearance from the screen was a slow, quiet fading. After a few roles in the late 90s, including a stint on The Secret World of Alex Mack, the credits stopped rolling. He didn't fall into the traps of Hollywood. He simply stepped out of the frame. Now 44, Shawn has successfully transitioned into a private life, leaving behind the immense pressure of being a prodigy. For a generation that watched him as a brilliant child, his absence is often mistaken for failure. But in reality, Shawn Nelson achieved something far rarer than an Oscar. He survived his own fame. He chose to be a man rather than a commodity. While the industry mourns the loss of a great actor, we can celebrate the success of a person who found peace outside the lens. His story is a poignant lesson for us all, that the most important role you will ever play is the one you live when the cameras are turned off. He remains a vivid memory of a what could have been, but in his silence, he has found a what is, a life lived on his own terms. Lark Voorhies. For any viewer who came of age in the late 80s and early 90s, the name Lark Voorhies evokes a very specific kind of nostalgia. As Lisa Turtle on the hit sitcom Saved by the Bell, Lark was the quintessential it girl, stylish, witty, and radiant. With her infectious smile and impeccable fashion sense, she wasn't just a character, she was a pioneer for young black girls in mainstream media. But as the final school bell rang in 1993, the bright lights that once embraced her began to cast long, complicated shadows. Unlike many of her co-stars who transitioned into lifelong careers, Lark's path took a sharp and puzzling turn into seclusion. The disappearance of Lark Voorhies was a slow, heartbreaking retreat. While she made brief appearances in soap operas like Days of Our Lives and The Bold and the Beautiful, the frequency of her roles began to dwindle by the late 90s. By the mid-2000s, she had almost entirely vanished from the industry. When she did reappear in rare, sporadic interviews, fans were deeply concerned by her erratic behavior and disconnected speech. This wasn't a celebrity choosing to retire in luxury. This was a woman battling a private storm. In 2012, her mother revealed the painful truth. Lark had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder. At 52 years old, Lark remains a haunting figure of what happens when the pressure of childhood stardom meets the fragility of the human mind. She didn't leave because she stopped being talented. She left because she was fighting for her very sense of self. To see her excluded from the initial Saved by the Bell reboot in 2020 was a sting to the hearts of many older fans. Though she eventually made a brief cameo, the mystery of her long absence serves as a poignant lesson on the cost of the spotlight. Lark Voorhies didn't just vanish, she moved into a quiet, protected world where the cameras couldn't follow, leaving us only with the memory of that vibrant girl at Bayside High. Yvonne Hudson. Of all the names on this list, Yvonne Hudson is perhaps the most mysterious. A woman who became a historical footnote in one of the most legendary institutions in television, Saturday Night Live. In 1980, during the show's infamously chaotic 6th season, Yvonne made history as the first black female cast member. It was a time of immense transition and high stakes. The original not ready for primetime players had left, and the show was struggling for its survival. Yvonne was thrust into the spotlight of Studio 8H, representing a breakthrough for representation in comedy. But the industry was not kind to those who broke barriers in the early 80s. Despite her talent, Yvonne was often relegated to featured player status and background roles. When the dust settled on that turbulent season and most of the cast was fired, Yvonne miraculously stayed on as an extra and bit part player until 1984, often appearing alongside a young Eddie Murphy. And then, as if she stepped through a hidden door, Yvonne Hudson vanished. She didn't just leave the show, she left the entire industry. There are no credits after 1984, no guest spots, no independent films, no stage plays. Now 70 years old, Yvonne Hudson exists as a digital ghost. There are no memoirs detailing her time at SNL, no tell-all interviews about the legendary sketches, and no social media presence. For the older generation who remembers the early days of late-night comedy, her absence is a baffling silence. Most SNL alumni, even the minor ones, utilize the platform to build a career. But Yvonne chose total anonymity. She became the ultimate missing person of television history. A woman who broke a major glass ceiling and then walked away so completely that it's as if she never existed at all. Her story is the purest form of vanishing. She gave us her talent for a brief moment and then reclaimed her life entirely, leaving behind only grainy footage and a legacy of silence. Lloyd Avery II. For those who sat in darkened theaters in 1991 to watch John Singleton's masterpiece, Boys in the Hood, one face remains seared into the collective memory. He wasn't a lead, but his presence was chilling. Lloyd Avery II played the nameless knucklehead in the red Mitsubishi, the man who pulled the trigger on Ricky, shattering the dreams of a generation. With his cold, vacant stare and authentic street energy, Lloyd didn't just act, he personified the cycle of violence. For a brief moment, Hollywood looked at this 22-year-old from a middle-class family in View Park and saw a rising star who could bring a dangerous, necessary realism to the screen. However, the disappearance of Lloyd Avery II is a dark descent where the lines between cinema and the street blurred until they disappeared entirely. After a few more roles in films like Poetic Justice and Don't Be a Menace, Lloyd began to live the very life he portrayed. He moved into the jungle, a notorious neighborhood in South Central, and joined a set of the Bloods. He wasn't just a guest in that world anymore, he became a participant. In 1999, the man who famously played a killer on screen was arrested for a real-life double homicide. The industry that once saw him as a breakthrough talent watched in silence as he was sentenced to life in prison. The final chapter of Lloyd's vanishing is the most haunting of all. In 2005, at the age of 36, Lloyd was found dead in his cell at Pelican Bay State Prison. He had been strangled by his cellmate, a self-proclaimed Satanist, in a ritualistic killing that went unnoticed for hours. It was a brutal, lonely end for a man who had the world at his fingertips. For our viewers who remember the visceral impact of his performance in the early 90s, Lloyd's story is a sobering tragedy. He didn't just leave Hollywood. He was consumed by a reality that his art had tried to warn us about. He remains a ghost of what could have been, a reminder that the shadows we see on screen are sometimes much closer than they appear. Brandon Hammond. If you were a fan of black cinema in the 1990s, you knew Brandon Hammond's face. He was the soulful eyes and the innocent voice of a decade. Most famously known for his role as Ahmad in the 1997 classic Soul Food, Brandon did something few child actors could. He held together a cast of heavyweights like Vanessa Williams and Vivica A. Fox. As the young narrator trying to keep his family's Sunday traditions alive after the death of Big Mama, Brandon wasn't just playing a part. He was the emotional heartbeat of every household that watched. From Waiting to Exhale to Space Jam, he was the little brother of the industry, a child prodigy who possessed a wisdom far beyond his years. But as the clock struck midnight on the 90s, the boy who seemed destined to be the next superstar simply stopped appearing. There was no dramatic headline, no public downfall, and no former child star scandal. Brandon Hammond achieved something even more mysterious in Hollywood, a clean, dignified break. As he transitioned from a cute child into a young man, the roles offered to him didn't match the depth he had already displayed. Instead of struggling for crumbs or taking roles that diminished his legacy, Brandon chose to step out of the frame. He didn't vanish out of failure, he vanished out of choice. Now 42 years old, Brandon Hammond is a man who reclaimed his identity. While fans on social media still post "Where is he now?" every time Soul Food airs, Brandon has spent the last 2 decades living a life away from the red carpets. He pursued his passions behind the scenes, focusing on writing and directing, and quietly finishing his education. For our older audience, Brandon's story is a beautiful, rare success. He is the child star who grew up, kept his head high, and decided that his worth wasn't defined by a box office number. He remains the face of our favorite family memories, a reminder that sometimes the greatest act of maturity is knowing when to take your bow and live for yourself. Lamont Bentley. For viewers who spent their Tuesday nights in the late 90s watching Moesha, Lamont Bentley was a constant source of joy. As Hakeem Campbell, Moesha's neighbor and best friend, Lamont brought a level of charisma and comedic timing that made him the breakout star of UPN. He was the boy next door with a mischievous grin, a talented actor who could flip from a joke to a moment of deep vulnerability in an instant. Beyond the sitcom world, his performance as H. Rap Brown in the film Panther showed an actor with the range and political consciousness to become a legendary dramatic force. However, the tragedy of Lamont Bentley is that he was in the middle of a voluntary disappearance when life made it permanent. By 2005, Lamont had grown increasingly disillusioned with the fake nature of Hollywood. Friends and family recalled that he felt pigeonholed as a sitcom sidekick and was desperately seeking a way to reinvent himself, perhaps through his first love, music. He was keeping a lower profile, spending more time with his 2 daughters, and preparing for a new chapter away from the Hakeem Campbell persona. He wanted to be seen as a man, not just a character. That transformation was cut short on January 19, 2005. While driving alone in Ventura County, Lamont's car soared over an embankment, ending his life at just 31 years old. He wasn't gone from the industry because of a lack of work. He was gone because he was searching for something deeper, only for his journey to end in a sudden, heartbreaking accident. For the parents and grandparents who watched their children grow up alongside Lamont on screen, his loss felt like losing a family member. He remains a vibrant, energetic memory, a young man who was just about to show us who he really was before the curtain fell too soon. He didn't fade away, he was snatched away, leaving us with an unfinished legacy and a smile that will never age. Tahir Moore. In the modern era of entertainment, a disappearance doesn't usually happen in the shadows. It happens in front of millions of followers. Tahir Moore was a vibrant force in the Los Angeles comedy scene, a man whose infectious laughter and sharp wit made him a staple on digital platforms like All Def Digital. For the middle-aged audience who moved from traditional TV to YouTube and social media, Tahir was a bridge, a comedian who felt like a younger cousin, always ready with a hilarious impression or a relatable story about family and everyday life. He had built a massive following, and his career seemed to be on a steep upward trajectory toward mainstream sitcoms and major specials. Then, around 2021, the digital heartbeat stopped. Without a goodbye post, without a formal hiatus announcement, and without a trace of scandal, Tahir's prolific social media presence went cold. For a man whose career was built on being online, this silence was deafening. Fans who had watched him daily began to leave thousands of comments. "Where are you? Are you okay?" The mystery deepened, as fellow comedians and industry insiders seemed equally confused, offering no clear answers to a public that had grown to love his energy. At 41 years old today, Tahir Moore's absence is a modern-day riddle. Unlike the actors of the 70s who could hide in another country, Tahir vanished from a world where everyone is connected. There are no recent interviews, no comedy club sightings, and no new projects. For our older viewers, His story is a poignant reminder of the burnout that comes with the 24/7 demands of modern fame. Tahir didn't just leave a job. He unplugged from a digital matrix that requires constant feeding. He remains a ghost in the machine, a reminder that in an age where everyone is screaming for attention, there is a profound, albeit mysterious, power in choosing to be silent. Calvin Lockhart. For the generation that came of age during the Black Awakening of the late 60s and early 70s, Calvin Lockhart was the definition of Black excellence and masculine beauty. Born in the Bahamas and trained in the prestigious theaters of London, Calvin brought an aristocratic, sophisticated presence to every role he touched. From the smooth-talking Big Joe in Cotton Comes to Harlem to starring alongside Sidney Poitier in Uptown Saturday Night, he was fine as wine and twice as talented. He was the man Hollywood wanted to turn into the Black James Bond, a star who commanded respect and commanded the camera with a single look. But Calvin Lockhart possessed a soul that was too large for the narrow boxes Hollywood tried to fit him into. By the late 1980s, despite a memorable turn as King Willie in Predator 2, Calvin began to feel the weight of an industry that still struggled to see a black man as more than a stereotype. Instead of fighting a losing battle for dignity in a city that didn't value his depth, Calvin performed the ultimate act of self-respect. He walked away. He didn't just leave Los Angeles, he left the United States entirely, returning to his home in Nassau, Bahamas. He spent the final decade of his life in near total invisibility to the American public. He lived quietly, focusing on family and local community work, far from the red carpets and the relentless pursuit of the next big role. When he passed away in 2007 at the age of 72 from complications following a stroke, many in the States were shocked to realize he had been living a peaceful, private life for years. For our viewers who remember his magnetic screen presence, Calvin's disappearance was actually a homecoming. He didn't vanish out of weakness. He vanished to reclaim his throne in a kingdom of his own making, proving that a man's peace is worth more than a star on a sidewalk. Merlin Santana. There is a particular kind of grief that comes with watching a young life cut short just as it begins to bloom. For those who watched The Steve Harvey Show in the late 1990s, Merlin Santana was more than just an actor. He was a charisma machine. As Romeo Santana, he possessed a natural charm and comedic timing that suggested a long, legendary career ahead of him. He was the teenager everyone wanted to be friends with, cool, handsome, and undeniably gifted. Having started as a child on The Cosby Show, Merlin had navigated the treacherous waters of young fame and seemed ready to take on the world as a serious adult actor. However, on the night of November 9, 2002, the laughter stopped. In a senseless act of violence in the Crenshaw district of Los Angeles, Merlin was shot while sitting in the passenger seat of a car. He was only 26 years old. This wasn't a story of a star lost to the typical Hollywood lifestyle. It was a tragic intersection of talent and a sudden, violent reality. The industry was paralyzed with shock. Merlin hadn't vanished by choice or by fading away. He was stolen from the screen at the very moment he was transitioning into a leading man. For our older viewers, remembering Merlin Santana is a somber reflection on the volatility of life. His death wasn't just a loss for his family, but a loss for Black cinema. The legal proceedings that followed revealed a tragic case of mistaken identity and manipulation involving a 15-year-old girl and 2 gunmen, leading to sentences of up to 70 years and life in prison for the perpetrators. But no verdict could bring back the light Merlin brought to our living rooms. He remains frozen in time, forever 26, forever charismatic, a stark reminder of a future that was snatched away. He is one of the most painful what-ifs in entertainment history, a star that didn't fade, but was violently extinguished. Sheldon Turnipseed. In the early 1990s, the PBS series Ghostwriter was a revolutionary piece of television. It portrayed a diverse group of kids in Brooklyn who solved mysteries, teaching a generation of children that literacy was a superpower. At the center of that group was Jamal Jenkins, played by a young, charismatic actor named Sheldon Turnipseed. Jamal was the heart of the team, brave, intelligent, and deeply loyal. For the parents and grandparents of that era, Sheldon was the kind of young man they wanted their children to emulate. He wasn't a caricature. He was a thoughtful, relatable boy who made learning seem cool. When Ghost Rider ended its successful run in 1995, the world expected Sheldon to transition into the next phase of a lucrative acting career. He had the experience, the name recognition, and the raw talent to move into sitcoms or film. But instead, Sheldon Turnipseed performed a disappearing act that would have baffled even the ghost he once worked with. He didn't take another role. He didn't pursue a music career. He simply stepped out of the public eye and never looked back. Now 48 years old, Sheldon exists only in the grainy, nostalgic reruns of 90s educational TV. While his co-stars like Julia Stiles went on to massive Hollywood fame, Sheldon chose a path of total anonymity. He reportedly chose to focus on his education and eventually transitioned into a career far removed from the entertainment industry. For our older audience, Sheldon's story is a refreshing alternative to the troubled child star narrative. He didn't vanish because of a scandal or a tragedy. He vanished because he had said everything he needed to say through his art by the age of 15. He remains a cherished memory of a simpler time, a boy who solved the mystery of his own life by deciding that he didn't need the world's applause to be happy. Garren Taylor. For the viewers who kept up with the early days of reality television, Garren Taylor was a breath of fresh air. In 2007, she captured hearts on BET's Baldwin Hills, a show that followed the lives of affluent black teenagers in Los Angeles. Garren was the sweetheart of the group, stunningly beautiful, ambitious, and possessed a quiet grace that suggested she was destined for a massive career in high fashion or film. She was a young woman with a vision, using her platform to show a different side of black youth, one filled with hope, elegance, and high aspirations. But as the show ended, Garren's disappearance became a source of quiet concern for her fans. She didn't chase the reality TV fame cycle. She didn't join more shows or manufacture scandals for clicks. Instead, she became increasingly private. While she modeled occasionally, her public appearances grew rare. For years, the question, "Whatever happened to Garren?" echoed through online forums. The tragic answer finally came in 2021. Garren had been fighting a silent, grueling battle with lupus, a cruel autoimmune disease that she chose to handle away from the prying eyes of the public. Garren passed away in April 2021 at the age of 30. Her vanishing wasn't a choice of career, but a choice of dignity. She spent her final years focusing on her health and her loved ones, refusing to let her struggle become a spectacle. For our older audience, Garren's story is a heartbreaking reminder of the fragility of youth. She remains a symbol of pure, untapped potential. A young woman who walked through the fire of a terminal illness with the same grace she showed on screen, leaving us with the memory of a smile that was too bright for this world to keep. Lorenzo Tucker. To understand the story of Lorenzo Tucker, we must look back to the very foundation of black cinema. In the 1920s and 30s, long before the civil rights movement, Lorenzo was a titan of race films, movies made by and for black audiences during the era of segregation. Nicknamed the Black Valentino, Lorenzo was a leading man of incredible poise and striking looks. He starred in classics like The Duke is Tops and Birthright, often playing the kind of sophisticated romantic roles that mainstream Hollywood denied to black men at the time. He was a pioneer who proved that black audiences craved and deserved their own heroes. However, as the 1940s drew to a close and the film industry began to shift, Lorenzo Tucker performed a vanishing act that remains one of the most dignified in history. He didn't fade into bitterness or struggle for bit parts in a changing Hollywood. He simply stopped. He walked away from the camera and the stage, transitioning into a completely different life. For the next 40 years, the man who had been a heartthrob to millions lived as a regular citizen, working in various professional roles and serving in the military during World War II. When Lorenzo passed away in 1986 at the age of 79, he had been away from the screen for nearly half a century. Most of the younger generation had no idea that a pioneer of cinema was living among them. For our seniors, who may remember the stories of the early black film circuit, Lorenzo's life is a testament to the power of self-reinvention. He didn't need the spotlight to define his worth. He was a star when the world told him he couldn't be, and he was a man of substance when he decided he didn't need to be a star anymore. He remains the architect of the cool that every black leading man today stands upon. Julius Carry. Who's the master? If you recognize that line, you are likely a fan of the 1985 cult classic, The Last Dragon. Julius Carry played the legendary Show Nuff, the Shogun of Harlem, a role that defined over-the-top brilliance. With his towering height, booming voice, and comedic menace, Julius created a villain that audiences couldn't help but love. He was a force of nature on screen, a character actor who could steal an entire movie with a single scowl. Beyond his martial arts antics, he was a steady presence in television for decades, appearing in everything from Murphy Brown to Boy Meets World. But as the 2000s began, the man who played the most boisterous character in cinema history began to grow quiet. Julius Carry didn't have a final, big role or a televised retirement party. He simply appeared in fewer and fewer projects. He began to move away from the frantic pace of Hollywood, focusing on his personal life and becoming more selective about his work. He had spent years as a working actor, the kind of reliable talent that kept the industry running, but he eventually decided he had given enough of himself to the public. Julius Carry passed away from pancreatic cancer in 2008 at the age of 56. For several years leading up to his death, he had essentially vanished from the public eye, fighting his illness with a quiet strength that stood in stark contrast to the loud, vibrant characters he played. For our older viewers, Julius's absence is felt deeply. He was a staple of our television history. His disappearance was a slow retreat into the peace of his own home, proving that even the Shogun of Harlem eventually finds that the greatest mastery is the one we have over our own time and privacy. He remains the undisputed master of our nostalgic hearts. Clifton Powell Jr. In the world of Hollywood, having a famous last name is often seen as a golden ticket. Clifton Powell Jr. is the son of the legendary character actor Clifton Powell, a man whose face has graced over 100 films, from Ray to Rush Hour. For a brief moment in the early 2000s, it seemed the younger Clifton was destined to carry the torch. He had his father's striking presence and natural ease in front of the camera, appearing in a few small roles that hinted at a promising career. The industry was ready to welcome him as the next generation of a working actor dynasty. However, Clifton Powell Jr. performed a vanishing act that was born out of a desire for his own identity. He didn't want to be Clifton's son in every audition room. He possessed a deep passion for basketball and technology, fields where a famous last name wouldn't help him sink a shot or write a line of code. He played college basketball at the University of California, Santa Barbara, and as he matured, he made a conscious decision to ghost the entertainment world entirely. He didn't want the fame, he wanted a foundation. Now 28 years old, Clifton Jr. is a successful businessman and tech entrepreneur, far removed from the red carpets. While he occasionally appears in the news due to his high-profile relationships, he has maintained a strict boundary with Hollywood, refusing to return to acting despite his pedigree. For our older viewers who admire a young man with the courage to forge his own path, Clifton's story is a breath of fresh air. He didn't vanish because he failed. He vanished to succeed on his own terms, proving that a legacy isn't something you inherit, it's something you build for yourself. Lauryn Hill. The disappearance of Lauryn Hill is perhaps the most famous and debated retreat in modern cultural history. For those who remember the 90s, Lauryn was more than a star, she was a prophet. Before she redefined music with the miseducation of Lauryn Hill, she was a brilliant actress, stealing scenes in Sister Act 2, Back in the Habit. She possessed a rare, luminous talent that bridged the gap between hip-hop grit and Hollywood glamour. She was on a trajectory to become one of the most powerful women in the history of the arts. But at the height of her power, after winning 5 Grammys in a single night, the pressure of being a product for the industry began to tear at her spirit. Lauryn didn't just stop acting. She began to deconstruct the entire concept of celebrity. She retreated from the public eye, seeking spiritual clarity and focusing on her growing family. For years, she was a ghost, appearing only in rare, cryptic performances or through the whispers of those who had seen her in her private life. She famously walked away from massive film offers and a level of fame that most would die for. Now 50 years old, Lauryn Hill's absence from the screen and her sporadic presence in music remain a form of protest. She didn't vanish out of a lack of talent, but out of a surplus of integrity. She refused to let the industry consume her soul for a paycheck. For our older audience, who has seen many stars burn out or sell out, Lauryn's story is a complex lesson in boundaries. She chose to be a mother and a seeker rather than a commodity. While the world still begs for her return, she has already given us enough. A reminder that the most important education is learning how to walk away from a world that doesn't deserve you. Jason Bernard. Jason Bernard was the kind of actor who made you feel safe the moment he appeared on screen. For our generation, he was the face of authority and wisdom. Whether he was the intense investigator in War Games, 1983, the steady vice principal in The White Shadow, or the commanding presence in the miniseries V, Jason was a working actor's working actor. He didn't need flashy leading roles to leave a mark. His gravitas and booming voice brought a weight to every scene. He was a staple of 80s and 90s television, a reliable bridge between the era of classic character acting and the modern age. But in the mid-1990s, Jason's vanishing happened in a way that was both tragic and quiet. After filming his role in the Jim Carrey comedy Liar Liar, Jason suffered a sudden heart attack and passed away in October 1996 at the age of 58. What makes his disappearance so mysterious and poignant isn't the death itself, but the silence that followed. There were no massive televised tributes, no star-studded funerals covered by every news outlet. It was as if the industry he helped build simply turned the page. For our seniors who watched him for decades, Jason Bernard's absence is a subtle, lingering ache. He didn't vanish into scandal. He vanished into the fog of Hollywood's short memory. He was a man who gave 30 years of his life to entertaining us, only to have his final exit go largely unnoticed. He remains a ghost of our favorite reruns, a reminder of the dignity and professionalism of a bygone era. Jason didn't need the headlines to be a legend in our living rooms. His work speaks for him, long after the industry moved on. He was the master of the quiet exit, leaving us with a body of work that feels like a warm, familiar conversation. Sly Stone. In the late 1960s, Sylvester Stewart, known to the world as Sly Stone, was the architect of a musical and cultural revolution. With his band, Sly and the Family Stone, he didn't just play music, he created a riot of funk, soul, and psychedelic rock that broke every racial and social barrier in America. While primarily a musical genius, Sly was a cinematic presence in his own right, appearing in the legendary Woodstock film and various television specials, where his charisma was so potent it felt like he was vibrating on a different frequency. He was a man of the future, a Technicolor prophet who taught us all to stand. However, the disappearance of Sly Stone is one of the most prolonged and baffling mysteries in the history of fame. Beginning in the late 70s, the man who once commanded the attention of millions began to retreat into a haze of personal struggles and an intense desire for isolation. For decades, he was a ghost. While he was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1993, he appeared for only a few fleeting seconds, looking like a man who had traveled from another dimension before vanishing back into the shadows. Rumors circulated for years that he was living in a van or hiding in plain sight in Los Angeles, but the Prince of Funk had effectively erased himself from the public ledger. Now 83 years old, Sly Stone remains an enigma. His 2023 memoir, Thank You for Letting Me Be Myself Again, offered a rare glimpse into his silent years, revealing a man who chose to withdraw rather than compromise his spirit. For our older viewers who danced to his music and felt the hope of his message, Sly's vanishing is a bittersweet symphony. He didn't lose his talent. He protected what was left of his soul from a world that wanted to consume him. He is the ultimate invisible man, a reminder that even the brightest stars sometimes need to retreat into the darkness to find their peace. He remains a legend of the void, a king who walked away from his throne to find himself. Leon Robinson. If you watched black cinema in the 90s, you didn't just know Leon, you experienced his magnetism. Known simply by his first name, Leon Robinson was the undisputed heartthrob of a generation. Whether he was the charismatic lead singer in the Five Heartbeats, the determined athlete in Cool Runnings, or the seductive and dangerous JT in The Temptations, Leon possessed a leading man energy that felt both classic and modern. He was the man women adored and men admired, a versatile actor who could play a saint or a sinner with equal conviction. He was on every magazine cover, a staple of the silver screen who seemed destined for the same heights as Denzel or Wesley. But as the new millennium dawned, Leon performed a vanishing act that was as smooth as his screen presence. He didn't suffer a public downfall or a string of box office failures. Instead, he made a conscious decision to shift his focus. He grew tired of the narrow roles offered to aging leading men and decided to pivot toward his other great passion, music. As the lead singer of his band, Leon and the Peoples, he began touring and recording, trading the high-stakes pressure of Hollywood sets for the intimate, authentic connection of a live stage. He didn't leave the arts. He simply moved to a room where the light felt more natural. Now 64 years old, Leon Robinson is the picture of a man who aged with grace and intention. While he still takes occasional roles in independent projects or television, he has largely vanished from the mainstream A-list circuit. He doesn't chase the paparazzi or manufacture headlines. For our audience who remembers the electric impact of his early films, Leon's story is a masterclass in longevity. He didn't vanish because he was forgotten. He vanished because he grew up. He proved that you don't have to be on every billboard to be a success. He remains a vibrant memory of our favorite movies, a man who took his bow at the perfect moment and walked into a life that was finally his own. 20 names, 20 broken dreams, and 20 lives that took a turn we never saw coming. It makes you wonder, is the price of fame truly worth the cost of your soul? Some of these stars found peace in the silence, while others were consumed by the very industry that once applauded them. But what do you think? Did they walk away to save themselves, or did Hollywood simply discard them when the lights grew dim? I want to hear your memories. Which of these stars do you miss the most? Leave a comment below, and let's keep their stories alive. Don't forget to like this video and stay tuned to Remembered Lives channel, because here, no legend is ever truly forgotten.